Hi guys, what happened to all the buzz about gaming on Mac? Hideo Kojima was wheeled out at WWDC 2023. Wheeled out. It kind of sort of reminded of Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
Anyway, Hideo Kojima was wheeled out at WWDC 23, hyping up Death Stranding. But since then, it's been very quiet. Top games are still being released, but you would think it would be something that Apple would be trying to hype up, considering how powerful Macs seem to be with the M3 and M4 chips. Interesting question, right, Oliver? Because there's always been this kind of there was this AAA push that's sort of dialed back. Obviously, we've got Cyberpunk coming, but at the same time, we've got a bunch of clearly very, very good engineers at Apple continuing to refine all of the metal effects technologies to bring them up to par with what everybody else is doing. So surely at some point they're going to push harder into the game space, particularly when you've got great machines, cost-efficient machines like the Mac Mini out there.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, and it actually seems like to me that Apple has shifted some of their gaming focus from iOS, from iPadOS, towards the Mac. Because if you notice, a couple of years ago, they announced their kind of push with their big AAA efforts, like Death Stranding, obviously, but also including games like Assassin's Creed Mirage, including games like Resident Evil 4, predominantly to iPads and iPhones, even if those games did end up on Mac. Whereas recently with titles like Cyberpunk, with titles like Control, titles like RoboCop, titles like AC Shadows, we're seeing games that are being brought to Mac predominantly, possibly with some Apple support there. But they're games that are not being brought actually to the mobile platforms. And so I think there is some investment there. Obviously, in terms of the technology, we've already seen Metal FX upscaling, which works very well. And they have this new denoiser, this machine learning based denoiser that apparently is kind of competing with some other machine learning denoisers on the PC side of things. And then also their frame generation solution, although they call it, perhaps a little bit more honestly, they call it Metal FX frame interpolation instead of frame generation. So they use a little bit of a different terminology there. But yeah, I think with Macs, it's always a little bit tough because the throughput of ports you're going to get, it's not quite as good as the throughput of PC games, and you're probably never going to get that. But with technologies like GPTK, like Crossover, I think there's definitely a market for playing actual PC games on Macs that didn't exist just a couple of years ago. And there's always a bunch of new exciting ports coming out every few months, and I think we're going to try to do more Mac coverage in the future to actually take a look at some of those titles and see what makes them tick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks back we were talking about the fact we didn't have the hardware, but that has now been addressed, so thanks to Apple for that. Yeah, we're going to see some really interesting stuff going forward.
That's kind of cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, you've been away, Alex.
Yeah, I've been away. Things change. Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about the whole Mac gaming arena.
Well, I'm very interested that someone else is in the GPU space pushing, at the moment, more DirectX things onto the Mac field, like things that we've seen in DirectX or elsewhere in PC space. I think it's going to become really interesting right after they reach mostly feature parity for everything that we see in DirectX space, that they start maybe pushing in their own direction. Which, I mean, they don't necessarily need to do that because they want to entice people to develop for them by at least being feature parity with what you can get on the PC side. But, you know, they have their own technology team. They're developing their own GPUs. They could easily add in something that right now is not tangible, like in the PC space, because you have to first get it ratified through Vulkan or DirectX. You have to have all of the IHVs supporting it, and then it starts getting game support, maybe. But them, they can just push on a GPU feature because they like it and they control the platform, right? So that the chance of it being taken up into titles is a lot higher. Kind of like what we saw with all the Metal effects stuff being added into games rather rapidly that were being ported. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing in the future, and I'll just be really curious to see what Oliver gets covered when that happens.
Mm-hmm. I think from my perspective, there needs to be more of a push. I do like the idea that they're kind of moving away from concentrating on iOS You know, because the big deal was, oh, here's Death Stranding. You can play it on an iPhone 15 Pro. And that's kind of cool, but we found that there are limitations and compromises involved in that. If you're going to be concentrating on Mac, then, you know, basically it's going to involve not just having all of the hardware and the software and the APIs in place. It's going to involve not just a concerted effort to get games running natively on Apple Silicon. It's actually going to involve Apple having to actually, I think, segregate gaming into its own area that gets its own presentations. So it doesn't feel as though it's just a part of a presentation that, you know, where they're announcing new Mac hardware or new Mac features. It's typically kind of like a gaming segment that appears within a presentation. I think they're going to have to sort of hive that out and actually start talking about gaming directly and exclusively in order to kind of present the message that gaming on the Mac is actually coming. It's good. We've got all the features. It looks great. And I think they need to, you know, really sort of make hay from the fact that there are so many really powerful laptops out there, and also machines like the Mac Mini, because there, you know, there is the sort of association with, you know, high-end prices with Mac hardware, but actually there's a lot of, I mean, Apple Silicon's just been a game changer. There's been great performance available across a range of price tiers. And that involves, you know, the MacBook Air, the Mini, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think there's, you know, there's potential there, right, Oliver? It just needs to be more firmly messaged, and it needs to be backed up with solid releases.
It would be nice to see maybe like an October Apple event where they reveal some new hardware, or show something off, maybe update on the state of Mac gaming a little bit there with those newer titles, with titles like Cyberpunk, with their new technologies, because typically you see presentations, if you see presentations at all about Mac technologies, it's in WWDC every year in June, where they have some developer presentations, and sometimes they'll have them in the keynote, but usually they relegate them to that presentation, which is a little bit of a lower profile presentation. I think the rumor now is that they're probably going to update most of the Mac line in early 2026, which would kind of preclude it from showing up at any of those major showcases that Apple might have lined up for the iPhone, or like the October event, which might include some details on new iPads and things like that. So yeah, I'd like to see them highlight it more, but just the nature of their schedule for releasing Mac products is that they're often releasing them outside of those major presentation times. So exactly finding the kind of room to show those titles off might be a little bit more challenging.
I mean, if you've got Cyberpunk coming to Mac, you know, that's basically an awesome jumping on point to actually sort of concentrate on gaming on Mac.
That's
exclusively.
True. Yeah, that'd be nice.
I was just thinking about who else they can wheel out, as Alan puts it. And in the case of Tim Sweeney of Epic, it would literally be wheeled out. He'd need to be dragged kicking and screaming into that.
That'd be funny. Yeah. I can't think of any other gaming celebrities who are at the same level of profile as Hideo Kojima. Maybe Jeff Keighley. I don't know if they would want to.
Jeff Keighley being wheeled out, Hannibal Lecter style.
Yeah, possible.
That'd be awesome.